today we are here and we are on we are going to look at building financial resilience. I hope you can see me. I'm trying to get, okay, so my video. So today we are on financial resilience. And the focus in this regard is on how SMEs can focus on building financial resilience. Now, for the purposes of this, by way of introduction, I mentioned earlier, my name is Vera, and I'm with the University of Ghana Business School and also CEO of Madiolo Consults. At the end of this webinar, we are hoping, as Madiolo Consults, that businesses and entities should be better placed to avoid relatively bad financial outcomes as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that has hit us, and also be able to buffer the financial shocks that have already come our way, and hopefully bounce forward and catapult into the future by leveraging our core competencies. Now we go on from here. Now the one thing is quite clear. We are in unprecedented times. This has never happened before. Ghana has never gone into a lockdown. Movement has never been that restricted. In fact, a lot of things have really gone in. And suddenly, these are things for a lot of businesses that are suddenly looking like the new normal. Closed until further notice. Closed because of the virus. Some may begin to think of selling. Airlines have literally gone out of business. And so to a large extent, and then top it off, a number of job cuts are going on. So even for individuals, a number of them are going to be feeling financial shocks that hitherto were not really their headaches. So how did we get here? It started first as a health crisis. So the COVID came in, and then governments sought to respond to the contagion. And by closing borders, shutting down a few things, an economic crisis started looming. Now, as the economy begins to shake up, then it resolves itself, and then now we're seeing a financial crisis. And this is the focus of what we want to look at today. Now, if you go back and look at the average business, from micro, small, medium, and large, you would find that to a large extent, lack of operational cash flow is significant for most, at least the relatively smaller and micro businesses. So employee size of 1 to 10, 11 to 50 most. Now those that get bigger even now begin to have their top challenges being the possibility of actually closing down. So we're going to go forward and then look at the fact that the realities we are facing, businesses are struggling, sales are really dwindling, and of course we did not see this coming. So to a large extent, many had not really prepared anything to stave off this kind of economic crisis. Now, small businesses have been scaling down and scaling down and scaling down, more because as consumers are staying home to stem the spread, consumer demand is going down. And so as demand drops, then businesses have to scale down because they don't have demand to take up. Now, what is the way forward? Because COVID-19 obviously is here to stay for quite a while. Staying for quite a while because we are yet to find a vaccine. We are yet to even understand how this health crisis is going to play out. And until we understand how it's really going to play out, the economic crisis will also keep on evolving, and the financial crisis will keep on also evolving. But we still have to find a way forward, even in the midst of the chaos. And that usually starts with one, what is our problem? Because for you to find a solution to a problem, or to find a solution to anything, first and foremost, you must frame the problem so that you know whether the solution can actually fit it. So that's about framing it, ideation, think about it. What really is our problem? For this webinar, the focus is to look at our financial issues. So in looking at the financial issues, one of the key things we have to focus on or look at critically is starting with data. We need information to be able to take the right decisions. So knowing how much of your demand has slumped, how much of it you have lost, how much is coming in, is key to making decisions about how to get to your new tomorrow. So let's say, for the average, what's the percentage of your typical monthly revenue or income that is still coming in? So let's say for a business, what's the percentage of your typical monthly revenue or income coming in? For an individual, what is your typical monthly income that is still coming in? For those who may have lost jobs or have been given pay cuts, what is coming in? It's only when you have this kind of data that we can begin to look at potential solutions going forward. Let me add that in our quest for answers, there's an unprecedented crisis. There has never really been anything like this. So there are no preset answers, no already cooked or we'll say already made solution that you can just go pick and apply. So at this point, we are going to just develop more of an iteration process. You keep on testing, adjusting, because even as the economic crisis is evolving, there are so many parameters that we don't know immediately. So we're going to use a process to uncover possible solutions that may apply for our small businesses and our large businesses, as the case may be. Now, one way we can look at is the fact that it will be good for us to focus on value-based management. Now, value-based management is a form or an approach to management where you are working towards a target which has a metric in a value form. And if we break it down into more of a schematic design, the first thing first and foremost would be have an objective. So for your business, for your person, what is your current objective? In this case, we are looking at financial resilience. What are the strategies or the designs that we can take to achieve the financial resilience that we currently seek? And then, what are the factors that will influence these objectives and these strategies that we have in mind? Now come up with an action plan, select the measures, implement, and then evaluate and see whether it is working. And if it's not working, you go back and then you rework once again, because now you know what is not working, what is working, and how to go about that. In the long run, we hope that you should be able to increase the value of first and foremost, stay in business, and then increase the value of the business. So then someone will say, okay, so for a general business, there are 4 key areas that obviously you must focus on. The people that you have in, so whether you've got the right skill sets and the right people in place to do your business, that's one. What strategy are you using to tap into the market? Are you a low cost differentiation? What have you? Now, what is your style for execution? What's the framework you have for execution when it comes to implementation? Now, one thing we should know is that, in fact, you can actually only execute a strategy if you have one. So if you don't have a strategy, then execution even becomes a bigger problem. So if you don't have a strategy, first, a business strategy in general, and for this particular case, a financial strategy, then execution is going to become a very big problem. Now, when we decide to spread it out, one thing we need to focus out seriously will be cash, because that has become the problem now. A lot of people are not buying, business is not moving, so cash becomes one of the problematic element. Now, cash is very, very, very important as far as business is concerned. Because in the world of finance and in seeking to build financial resilience, cash flow is king. Without cash, you are not going anywhere because you need cash to pay up on your immediate obligations, sometimes to get your relevant inventory, to pay up on utilities, etc., to keep your business running. So without cash, you are not moving anywhere. So in managing our cash immediately, then our focus begins to shift a bit from the longer term to the very immediate. How liquid are we? Do you have enough cash flowing in for you to be able to do the needful activities of the business and keep you in check? Now, if you already have a budget, an existing budget, this is the time to go back and look at it critically and see whether it is feasible. And if you don't have one, it is time to draw up one immediately. So as a business without a budget, because a budget is typically a monetary expression of the plans that you have for the period. So if you don't have a budget, please draw up one. And if you already have one, because it was based on a number of assumptions, and those assumptions are seriously and fast changing because of the COVID-19, you want to go back and take a look at it to find out whether it fits your current situation. And if it doesn't, what changes you need to make to get that running. In general, I can say that liquidity is the oil that will take you into the future. Because if you don't have liquidity, there's no future. Because as I already mentioned, if you don't have liquidity to keep your workers there, to keep production running, then you're likely to even go out of business. So by the time so it's not about having wealth if that wealth cannot be easily converted into cash to make the relevant payments and purchases that you may need. So there's no point in having the money appearing after the business has collapsed. That's too late. So in order for us to get into the future, then we have to focus on getting our liquidity elements right. So there are a few things you need to start asking yourself at this point, looking at the fact that liquidity is key. Given your current cash and liquid balances, so when I mean liquid balances, we are talking about short-term investments or any kind of investments you can easily convert to cash at the slightest notice. How long can they last? You need to know. So for this reason, you need to do a lot of scenario planning. For example, as a business, if only 10% of your business is coming in, what are the implications? You need to sit down and put that on paper and begin to tell, okay, if we only have 10% coming in, then we want to be channeling the funds this way and not that way. Or we need to take a second look at A, B, C, D, and we need to revise. Or you could ask yourself, if you are to operate the way you are currently operating, how long would you last? Is it 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then after that, what? It's critical that you know in advance what is really feasible and for how long. The crisis in of itself came as a surprise. So it might be good to limit the quantum of surprises that will end up coming your way from here on. So I would like to ask at this point, for most of you, it would be good to find out which of these 3 categories best describe you. That you're already in a liquidity crisis because suddenly either through a job loss or the closure of the business, you're unable to make payments for just about anything. Or that you have done some adjustments and you realize that even though you have some funds available, you need additional funds from external sources to complete the year 2020. So then that means you begin to think of how you're going to source for those additional funds from external sources. But the goal is to have sufficient funds for the period 2020 at least. So For those who may be at point 1, you may want to be working towards the last stage. And those who are also in the midpoint, you also want to be ensuring that you have additional funds that will make sure that you are sufficient for the period 2020. Now, once you've found this funding gap that you need for 2020, if any, then you begin to want to think of fixing the bugs. You've got to solve the problem. Now, how do we solve the problem? Now, for a lot of businesses, it's a complete collapse for demand. A lot of hotels are literally now operating close to just about 30% of capacity when they were usually operating around 70%. For some businesses in the food chain, for some, not in terms of the production, but the bars and the eateries, a number of them have literally lost out almost fully on demand. Now, to be able to get back onto our feet, we need to start re-engineering our business models. We need to begin to enhance, and we need to look at diversification. Now, I'll come back to this slide, but let's watch this, which is a video from DW.
Breathe in, breathe out. When COVID-19 patients' lungs fill up with air this way, their chances of survival increase. The machine that pumps air in is a kind of high-tech improvisation. A startup in Barcelona wondered how it could help the many people infected with coronavirus.
We saw how there were lots of problems with breathing in Italy. We looked for a solution and found this inflating bellows resuscitator. It's used to supply ventilation to people who cannot breathe.
The startup's idea received support from VW's subsidiary SEAT, which is not producing cars right now because of the virus. Workers there wanted to help instead of sit around at home.
After a 3-day production halt here at the factory, we came upon the idea to do something for Spanish society.
14 prototypes in 3 weeks. Technicians and doctors worked together for 12 to 14 hours each day on the emergency ventilator. Some of it is even made up of car parts.
Individual parts that we'd either bought, that we use in cars anyway, such as the windscreen wiper motor, or parts that we've made ourselves, instead of waiting for a long time for others to make them.
Up to 300 ventilators are produced each day at the SEAT factory. The first ones are already being used in Spanish hospitals.
Now, if you notice, this company or this video showcases a car manufacturing entity that, based on the slump in demand, has suddenly turned out what we call core competence. They have channeled their core competence into producing the relevant market need, in this case, ventilators. There's another case in point where a pizza making company, their core deal was that they had very hot ovens, they could bake things. They translated that, now that nobody was buying pizza, they translated that into providing face shields. So they started using acrylic and then started using the heat to bake their shields. We have distilleries that, now that nobody was really meeting for the happy hour and alcohol per se, in terms of the socializing alcohol was not available, what they did was that they translated that core competence into the production of hand sanitizers, etc. So at this point in time, it is important for every business to sit down and brainstorm and ask, what really is their core competence? What is the core competence, so that it's going to re-engineer the business to now meet a different market design. Having said that, so you need to then also begin to diversify. Diversify means that begin to brainstorm and start looking at other ways of generating business. So begin to look around the COVID era. What are the challenges? Currently, a number of economies are blocking their borders. And then because they are even afraid whether or not their local production of food and other things will be sufficient given the shocks, most of them may not be in a position to export, in which case for Ghana like this, where we do a lot of importations, it means also that there's a possibility that things that we used to import will no longer be available on the market. Then the question is there the opportunity to produce to meet that demand? So it used to be something that was imported, but with the exporting country beginning to close their doors, then it is important that we begin to take a look and see whether there'll be a gap which as an SME or as an entity, you can take steps to fill out. You also need to think of how you're actually going to re-engineer your sales in this era of social distancing. So for some food preparatory or restaurants, etc., they have immediately rolled out the takeout and the relevant dispatch services. So now, instead of coming in to eat, the food can be delivered to your home so that you can have your home setting or your restaurant setting at home. So it is time for businesses and entities to sit down and begin to re-engineer. How are we going to increase sales? For some, it may mean that you're going to commit, you'll be able to get clients to commit to making purchases now for delivery later. And of course, that usually means that you do a quick brainstorming session and look at what kind of pricing mechanisms you can use, what kind of discounts you can offer. Like it used to happen in the airline industry, if you buy your ticket in advance and you lock in the payment, it was cheaper compared to buying a ticket today and flying out the very next day. So there's a need to begin to re-engineer the whole sales function given this era of social distancing. Then also very importantly, you need to free up cash within the organization's operations and investments. And also look at cost containment, which means strategic cost management. So you need to free up the cash by mapping the cash, where cash flows from. Look at the pathway for cash, and then you begin to try and bring in more, and at the same time, minimize the outflow buttons such that you're able to have enough cash to move around. So that will be a cost containment element.
Breathe.
So if we look at cash, for the typical business, you have cash from your mainstream operations, you're buying and you're selling, however it is you buy or your services. Then you have money from investments you make. So for a typical manufacturing entity, you have your machinery and equipment, you have your inventory, your receivables, that's your debtors, the clients who buy from you on credits, etc. And then you have cash coming in from financing activities, whether you are borrowing or equity is being raised. Now, your focus should be on actual cash. And let me try and explain this here. Profit is typically a bookkeeping function, meaning that if you sell to a client on credit, and then you record it in your books, depending on the cost of the purchase, you would have made a profit. So within your books, you have profit. But if you sold to the client on credit, it presupposes that until they make payments, the actual cash is not available. So that if they have not paid and your supplier comes to you for payment, then you're going to have a challenge, in which case you may have to go out and borrow to pay your supplier whilst you wait for your clients to pay up. So the focus then should be on actual cash. So it is not about profits per se, but whether there is enough cash to turn or oil the till. Now, when we spread that out better, we are going to notice something here. The typical balance sheet in the world of finance, your balance sheet is your worth at a point in time. But what you seem to be worth has two components: what you owe and what you own. So if you take a typical business, for example, they have their buildings, that's a factory or what have you. They have actual cash in the bank. They have the inventory that they use for production. And depending on whether they give credit for sales made, they actually would have receivables. Now, these are funded or paid for, in a sense, by liabilities, meaning owings, things they may have borrowed in one way or the other. When you owe rent, you owe your workers' wages. It is their effort that gives rise to these. And then also your shareholders' equity and surplus profits that you have moved into your balance sheet. So this is the typical balance sheet. So for a typical business, for you to be able to know where to target to free up cash, you need to have a very clear sense of what your balance sheet looks like. So if for any business you don't have a balance sheet at this point, or for any entity, even as a person, you don't have a balance sheet at this point, it's going to be difficult to know which entities are touchables and which ones are not touchable for your peculiar issue. Now we go on to the next. So once we juxtapose them appropriately, you notice that to the left side, depending on how you view where the pointer is now, these are entities or variables you can tweak to, well, if you increase them, you get some cash coming in to help you. Just that for some of them, you've got to be very careful and look at the underlying factors before you go increasing. So let's say long-term debt. At this point in time, we don't know what the future holds. So you may want to be extra careful how much long-term debt you rack up or you go in taking. But what you can actually do is to, if possible, negotiate for more flexible payments on it. So that will actually end up releasing some more cash. So you see, some banks are deferring loan payments for about 6 months. So it means if you've got a long-term loan with a bank and you're able to negotiate and defer repayment for a while, that literally reduces some cash or frees up some cash that you can use to see to emergency elements. You can also raise some short-term funding through notes payable or any form. If you have the means or the avenue, take advantage of trade credits if the need arises. If your supplier can give you trade credits and they're capable, you should take it up. You can also defer other payments. If you can get your landlord to renegotiate your rent payments such that you don't have to pay immediately, you can negotiate some deferrals with your workers. But notice that for these first four, they also sometimes constitute income flows for the other party to the contract. So you want to be careful how you go about. You don't just unduly decide to delay trade credit, meaning your supplier's credit, and say you pay when you have funds, because that is also the avenue they are seeking to push. Once you pay, they also get cash. So it has to be a full-blown discussion on what is appropriate and inappropriate. If you have your shareholders being capable, you may want to raise some extra equity capital, shareholders capital. And then where possible, there's income surplus. But of course, at this point, income surplus, though an avenue, may be difficult for most, if not all. Now, these are the areas where you want to minimize your cost and keep them as lean as possible. There's no need to have excess inventory. One way also is to ensure that then you are selling more. If you're selling more and you don't have excess inventory, that works better. You should also keep a lean equipment and machinery warehouse, in a sense that there's no need to have excess machinery that are not really useful. So you need to take stock of your machinery and equipment and begin to look at what is usable and what is not usable. That is the way to go. Receivables, which we also know as debtors. Put in systems to collect as quickly as possible and as much as possible amounts outstanding from your debtors. And where you have short-term investments, you may want to go and liquidate them so that you use them to manage the heat upfront. Because what is important is to free up cash and stay alive as a business, as an entity, so that you can rope yourself into the future. Now, we're getting to the end of our discussion here. And some of the takeaways that I want you to seriously deliberate on is that you need to immediately go back and begin to put to paper how you're going to stimulate immediate liquidity and keep your businesses solvent. Even as a person, in terms of personal finance, you'd want to stimulate immediate liquidity and keep yourself solvent. Now, work to generate sufficient cash, at least for the year 2020. Create a system. And to create that system, it means that you have to forecast frequently with detailed scenario analysis, because with every day, the facts on the ground keep on changing. So in order for you to be closer to what tomorrow looks like, you need to use the facts of today to create the relevant scenario analysis so that you can maximize your liquidity. On the average, you need to know what are the short-term and long-term financial implications on your business. Try to ascertain them as best as you can at this time. It may mean a brainstorming session for your business, for you with your employees. Try and research the most significant elements that can affect your forecast. What fundamentals can suddenly throw your vision and your dream away. You need to research them and know. So they are known or unknowns. If they are known, because if you search, you find, but at this point, they are unknowns to you, so find them out. And then more importantly, put together and see if, will your balance sheet, meaning that what you are worth in totality, including what you owe and you own, are you strong enough to weather the storm of COVID-19? Now, for some who are adept at the field of finance, it means you can sit down and do it on your own. But for certain small businesses that do not have it, this may be the time to get a bit of help to get you to stand on your feet, to find out where you're really weak, because by knowing where you're really weak, you know where to put your funds and where not to put your funds. Now, start generating backup plans to deal with all vulnerabilities from your capital and liquidity perspective. What are your vulnerabilities? And then what will you do if this should happen? What will you do if that should happen? Have backup plans, because we are all vulnerable. And so having a backup plan means that if plan A doesn't work, then you shift to plan B. It will be very disastrous not to work with plan A, or to have plan A failing only to realize that you don't have a plan B. So have a backup plan. And at this point in time, you need to constantly question what constitutes an appropriate use of the limited resources that you have. Because there are competing uses and considerations. And within this current environment, you cannot afford to spend money in the wrong places. Now, sometimes to help you do that, you can use this model captured as the moose cow, as I like to call it, but it's standardized framework that you can follow. Now, the capital usually refers to the letter of interest. The small is just a continuation of it. So whenever you need to make any expenditure, you need to ask yourself, is it a must-have? A must-have because without it, you're going to die off as a business or die off as an entity, then it is a must-have. And so it is essential, it is crucial, you must have it. That will be the deciding factor. Now, or in some cases it's a should have. It is relevant. It is going to add on value. And so whilst it is not critical to a life or death situation for your person or as a business, it will definitely enhance the value of the entity. Then you may want to consider spending. Now, the last two are usually in the regions of discretionaries. You could have it. It enhances one or two things, but the business will not go down if you don't have it. You will not die off if you don't have it. You will not become insolvent if you don't have it. Business will not come to a standstill if you don't have it. So that's a could have. And would like to have, of course, is that they are the nice things to have, but not necessarily essentials. So at this point in time, with very limited financials where we are seeking to consolidate all gains, you want to seriously subject every expenditure to this framework to tell you whether or not it is something you want to undertake or it is something you do not want to undertake. Then we go on to our conclusion. Now, to a large extent, our SMEs generally contribute about 70% plus of our economy. So we need to have them surviving. So how they respond to this crisis is the number one factor that will determine whether they will remain successful and thrive into the future, or there's going to be a failure given this turnaround situation. Now, whilst we can correct a number of wrong decisions one way or the other, taking too long to respond can actually have very detrimental impact. So like we have a case where currently the government has come up with a stimulus package to help SMEs. The modalities have not been rolled out completely yet. And day in, day out, firms are dying off. Now, once they die off, the stimulus package is not going to be that relevant. So it's also about timeliness of the response. So if we're going to be financially resilient, it means the timeliness of the response is also very crucial. I'll end by saying that if our businesses can stay solvent, then we have a greater chance of recovering as an economy after the virus threat subsides. Thank you very much for your time. And if there are any questions that anybody would like to ask, you may do so by typing in the chat box so that we respond accordingly. Thank you for your audience.